And welcome back to Prep Recruiting Insider, PRI, here at Cello's in Metairie. I'm the head coach of PRI, Rick Gailey, along with your Prep Recruiting Insider, Renee Nato. And we're joined today, and it's such a great pleasure to be able to introduce this gentleman to you, Mr. Terrence Jones, former Lutcher Bulldog. Well, you're never a former, are you? A Lutcher Bulldog and a Tulane Green Waver, and now working so hard for so many people right now in education. Thank you, Terrence, for being here with us today.
Thank you guys for having me. Love to be here. Thank you.
Terrence, always great to see you, buddy. And you know, talking to the guys at Lutcher and stuff about recruiting and stuff. Take us back a little bit. You won a state championship in 1983 with the Bulldogs. But how was the recruiting process? It's a lot different now than it was then, but how was it for you, and what schools did you really look at before pulling the trigger on the Green Wave?
Well, actually, you're right. It was a lot different. We didn't have the technology as we have now, and so basically it's word of mouth, phone calls, mailing, snail mails, and finally the coaches would come in and visit you at your particular high school. But it was intense. I didn't particularly thought I was going to get, think that I was going to get as many offers, being that Lutcher was situated where it was situated. But just think if the radar back then, if the technology was available back then, the vast amount of opportunities that you would get. But to your point, to your question, it was something that I wasn't prepared for, I'll tell you that. I enjoyed the attention that was bestowed upon me while I was playing, but it was intense, so much so where I had to sometimes be to myself. There were some schools out west, UCLA, USC, obviously the southeastern region of the United States, those particular schools, Baylor, Texas, but obviously Oklahoma, Nebraska, LSU, obviously Tulane. So, and for me, I went through it in a way that most 16, 17-year-old, 18-year-old go through. You're surprised at all of the attention that you get. And at the same time, you have to make a decision along with with your parents and everybody else who's chiming in. But it ultimately boils down to you, because at the end of the day, you're going to be at that university by yourself, and you're going to have to put in the work in the classroom as well as on the football field. So all those things were going through my mind, and at the same time, I still had to make a decision. My mother, she was never a football person. And so I remember one particular game she came and she was wondering why everybody was piling up on me. But at the end of the day, it was a nice process. I enjoyed the attention that was given, and I ultimately decided Tulane for a few reasons. Particularly, it was close. Obviously, the academic piece was there. I was going to play my first year. Coach Mac Brown was just coming in, new staff. The offense was going to be similar to what we was running at Lutcher High School. I wanted to throw the football more so than run it. I committed to the University of Oklahoma with Barry Switzer. Obviously back then, there was 80% run, 20% pass, and I didn't mind getting hit, but I didn't want to get hit that much. So I decided to base that upon drop back, throwing the football, because I love to throw the football, and I didn't want it to be one-dimensional in terms of a running quarterback. And so Tulane was the ideal place for me.
And I can tell you for a fact, because I was on the staff before Max, that you're always on the Tulane radar. And Tulane and Lutcher has always had a great relationship, exactly. A whole string of players from there. But talk about back in that day, it's still important now, but it was really important then, the relationship with your recruiting coach. That's something that we don't always see. Talk about who your recruiting coach was, the relationship with not only Coach Brown, but your recruiting coach, and then even your positional coach.
Well, I think Coach Jenkins alluded to it earlier. It's about a relationship. And I think nowadays, if a kid and a coach can build that relationship, I think that's one of the games that you won early on in the recruiting process. Coach Darryl Moody was the quarterbacks coach and the running backs coach at Tulane. He was the recruiting coordinator for Tulane, and that's the one who recruited me. To your question, he was at just about every basketball game that I played. And he would come to school. I look around the corner, there he is. You know, and not respectfully so with the rules and all, he did that. But at the same time, I felt the genuineness there. Coach Lutcher, someone also from University of Oklahoma, he was there a lot as well. So it was between those two, actually. But Darryl Moody, you know, I love basketball. That was my second sport. And he was there, basketball games. And so he kind of had a chance to see me outside of football. And saw my competitiveness. And every time I looked up in the stands, he was there. I remember one time during a basketball game, I went up for a layup, I got fouled, and I was on the floor, and I looked up, who was walking into the door? Coach Moody. So he developed a relationship with me, my mother, and the assistant principal at my high school. And so you saw him, I felt him, even though physically he wasn't near, but I remember some things he would say to me. And all those things sticks in your mind, because there's everybody's saying the same thing, everybody want to win you over, but there's certain things that sticks with you that you know, put that particular coach or that particular school in the forefront. And I thought the relationship he established with me early on helped me to make that decision.
You show what kind of passer you were. Tulane has turned out some pretty impressive quarterbacks, but you still hold a school record for 484 yards in one game against TCU. You had 5 300-yard games, TCU, ULL, Virginia, Ole Miss, and LSU. Any game sticks out. That's excess of 300 yards passing.
Well, it's unbelievable still there with all the quarterbacks that came through, the Sean and PJs and those guys. And, but, you know, one game particularly, I think because from a competitive standpoint, it was against Florida State and Deion Sanders. We competed very, very well against them. Ultimately, they beat us because of actually the depth of what they had and the talent. But, you know, it was a good football game, both sides of the football field. And so we competed, and I enjoyed the competition against them. Martino had a hell of a game that night. But that particular game stuck out. Now, I think the TCU game as well in the Dome, and I think you alluded to that earlier. Mm-hmm. We were just on that night. You know, sometimes you're on, right? Offensively and defensively, from a quarterback, receiver standpoint, you're just on, right? And so you guys are athletes. You know, when you're on, right? Nothing, you're clicking. And we was in the zone that night, we racked up yards. The game plan was great, and we clicked on every series just about.
And that's what we just had to take. We just looked at is some of those great completions that you had against TCU, and you're right about being in the zone. Everything just seems bigger and slower and so easy when mentally you're there. We're going to be right back with Terrence Jones with another segment, really get into what he's doing now as well, helping so many people. This is Prep Recruiting Insider, PRI, here at Cellos in Metairie. Let them cater your next big event. We'll be right back with Terrence after this. Welcome back to PRI. This is Prep Recruiting Insider, and we're here today in Cellos in Metairie. I'm the head coach of PRI, Rick Daly, along with Renee Nato, continuing our conversation with Terrence Jones, the former Lutcher Bulldog and Tulane Green Wave great. Once again, Terrence, I'm just so excited about having you here today.
Well, it's a good time to be here. Thank you guys for having me.
So many young football fans had Terrence Jones posters on the wall growing up and stuff. Who was Terrence Jones' favorite player? Who did you model your style after?
Well, in the parks in Lutcher, I was a Roger Staubach fan. Roger Staubach was my guy. My uncle and I, he introduced me to the Cowboys, and I've watched Roger from the beginning. I was able to until he retired. From Roger came obviously Doug Williams, Warren Moon. Mm-hmm. So those guys, I try to not only their style of play and their competitiveness, but their humbleness. Mm-hmm. I pick up on that as well. And so those guys I try to emulate both on and off the football field.
And you used your degree. You went back for your degree.
Yes.
You were drafted by the Chargers, played in the CFL, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And then you got the bug that you had to have your degree. Talk about the decision-making process that went into being a player, but realizing I got a lot of life left after football.
Well, and that's the thing. Some guys nowadays, you have to realize that sports won't be there forever. And nowadays, you're required to have at least a bachelor's degree. Now, if you make enough money, you can leave college and come back eventually and get it. But however, for a large percentage of guys, they don't come back. And then they find out later that, oh, wow, I need to get a degree. So my thing was, when you get a scholarship, you're allowed 5 years to get your degree. I got drafted in '89 by the Chargers. At that time, I did not graduate. I didn't finish. But I knew I was always going to come back because my mother, she told me in high school, I don't know anything about football, but you got an opportunity to go get a degree, the first in this family, go ahead and do that. And so I promised her that I was going to do that. And so when my football career was over in Canada, I came back and finished up my degree in '95 in sports administration at phys ed. So, and then after that, I also went back and got a master's degree in organizational management from University of Phoenix here in Metairie. So it's always been a blend of mine as I'm getting older in life to say that because 9 times out of 10, a lot of times guys believe that they're going to be able to play forever. Either your numbers game or injury away from not being on anybody's football field. And so having that, you always say it is almost like a cliche, academics to get your degree, but really, it is not a cliche nowadays. Guys need to go get their degree and finish up because you would need it long down the line. And so I came back and finished, got my degree from Tulane, and then I began to I always like to say got a real job. Right? So most people say football is working, but that's really fun. But then you have to be at work, a regular Joe now, so to speak, and get a real job. And that allowed me to begin my post-football career.
A lot of young men and young ladies watching this show right now, Terrence, it might be basketball, swimming, softball, anything, football. What questions do you ask in a recruiting process? What is important now? What does a recruit, male or female, need to know in the process?
Well, they need to know exactly what they're getting themselves into in terms of a school in a city. Tulane is a city. I always like to say the campus is a city within a city. You have to understand that when you leave home, if you leave that very far from if you leave far from home, you have to know that particular city and surroundings. And so you will know that you by yourself, basically. And so making the decision, going to a particular university, you have to take into account the city that school is in, the coaching staff, the academic environment, the support staff that's there. Because 9 times out of 10, those coaches, their job is to win, unfortunately. And from the social standpoint, there's some support in place, but you as a youngster going to these particular universities, you're going to learn along the way. So you're going to mess up. That's part of growing up in life, right? Nobody's perfect. But at the same time, there's going to be situations where you need to be comfortable when you get into a situation. Or if you just don't get into a situation, you just need to be comfortable away from home because there's distractions out there. And so I would say to not only the recruits, but to their parents, get involved. Right? Get involved with your son or your daughter opportunities to go to college because at the end of the day, it's a free scholarship. I call it the academic lottery. Mm-hmm. Get involved, parents, get involved with your kids because the more they're comfortable with that decision because they're going to be going home for a minimum of 4 years, they need to know that the comfort level is there away from home.
And it's coaching staff is important, style of play is important, but really the school is more important. Don't you think that as a recruit, you've got to go? You got to go to a school you want to go to, more than anything else, because who knows who's going to be there through your 4 or 5 years?
No, you're exactly right. Because at the end of the day, it's on you. After you say yes, I'm committed, I'm going to this particular school. Now the job is yours to get your academics and perform athletically on the football field, basketball, swimming, whatever. Right? It's on you. So you can't blame anyone else after you make a decision. After you're there, you got to commit to the academic rigors as well as the athletic rigors because it's going to be tough nowadays because the name of the game is winning. And you have to balance yourself with school work as well as practice. And nowadays, football, the major sports, I should say, football is almost a 12-hour deal in college. And it's a job, unfortunately. But that's just the name of the game where we are today. But I would say many kids wouldn't trade that for anything. So, but you have to go to a university where you're going to be most comfortable, not where other folks think you, because at the end of the day, it's on you. And there are some lonely days, but at the end of the day, their surroundings will again help you when you feel in those particular ways.
Last 30 seconds, Terrence. Being a Lutcher Bulldog really put you in the right track, and how important is that in your life?
Well, it is, because again, it's a small town, but with the program that we have, we produce great athletes, right? And great young men as well. It's something that I would cherish, obviously until I pass, this go to another life. But we at Lutcher, we promote excellence, and so at the same time, when you leave here, when you leave Lutcher, you come away with an experience that you can take away with you forever.
That's the great Terrence Jones. So happy for him to be with us today, and he continues to do great things for other people, using that degree to the best of his ability. And he proves that if you can speak and if you can write and communicate and complete sentences, every opportunity is out there for you. Thank you, Terrence, for being here with us today. Prep Recruiting Inside of PRI at Cellos. We'll be right back.